Alright guys, I wanted to make this video real quick and I'm going to get into this article. This is off the New York Post. Governor Cuomo announces mandatory COVID-19 testing for out-of-state travelers. So I told you months ago it's going to get to the point where there's going to be checkpoints, you have to provide papers, you're probably not going to be able to leave, your state to go to another state, or even your house probably coming up in the next month. But before I get into that, I want to show you this video. This is a video of Kary Mullis. He is the inventor of the PCR test, and he actually died a few months before the pandemic started. I believe it was August of last year, kind of mysteriously. Credit to Gaz Young. This is off his Bitchute channel. I'm going to pull this video full screen. Here we go.
Misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there.
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. No, the results, the interpretation of it. If you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. It is. No, there's very little of what they call HIV, and what's been brought out here by Philpott and Isai already. The measurement for it is not exact at all. It's not as good as our measurement for things like apples. An apple is an apple. You can get something that's kind of like, if you got enough things that look kind of like an apple and you stick them all together, you might think it was an apple. But and HIV is like that. Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what
Also,
it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that.
All right. So those are some pretty damning statements for anyone who wants to use a PCR test as a golden standard for testing, right? So let me get into this article. Most people who visit New York will have to quarantine for 3 days and then prove they are negative for COVID-19 before they are, quote, free to go about their business, Andrew Cuomo announced Saturday. The strict new mandate, which exempts New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania residents, which, by the way, it will include everybody, it might not now, but it will, eliminates the governor's quarantine advisory list, which restricted travel from over 40 coronavirus hotspots across the country. Now, travelers must show proof of a negative test taken within 3 days of arriving in the Empire State, and must also quarantine for 3 more days and get a new COVID-19 test on the 4th. If that's positive, they must isolate for 2 weeks, the governor said at an Albany press meeting. 4 days plus 3 days is 7 days. Thank you, Andrew Cuomo. And that's basically, by all probability, the incubation period. Where'd you get your degree? As he announced 2,049 new cases across the state and 8 deaths reported yesterday. There will be no metrics. There will be one rule that applies across the country. Sounds like leftism, doesn't it? Anyone who refused to be tested must quarantine for 14 days. New Yorkers who return home within a day of leaving must take a test within 4 days of their arrival, Cuomo said. But if they are gone longer than 24 hours, then the new rules apply. So, yeah. Anyway, this douchebag wants everyone to get tested if they're going to come into the state. A test that the creator of the test said, hey, it's not used for that. It's not really going to tell you anything. All it's doing is taking RNA samples and then multiplying it over dozens of cycles to give you more than you had when you started. That's what the test is. All right, this article is from PolitiFact, and it's called COVID-19 PCR tests are scientifically meaningless. The United States has ramped up its COVID-19 testing capacity this summer in an effort to slow the spread of the virus. Some bloggers and Facebook users say that's a mistake. In a June 27th article, a website called Off Guardian wrote that the tests many healthcare providers use to diagnose COVID-19 are, quote, scientifically meaningless. These PCR tests are meaningless as a diagnostic tool to determine an alleged infection by a supposed new virus called SARS-CoV-2, reads the article, which has been shared more than thousands of times on Facebook. Okay, now that, they're trying to say this isn't a true statement. It is an entirely true statement. You just heard it from the mouth of the guy who invented the test, who died a few months before this pandemic kicked off. Weird, huh? It's almost like they didn't want him speaking out once it was happening, right? The article was flagged as part of Facebook's effort to combat false news and misinformation on its newsfeed. It has also been copy-pasted into text posts, which have been shared thousands of times. Those dangerous text posts. Off Guardian was launched in 2015. The site's name comes from the fact that its founders were all, quote, banned from the Guardian's comment is free sections, according to its About section. Off Guardian has a track record of publishing conspiracy theories and Russian propaganda, both of which those terms are completely meaningless. So we wanted to take a closer look at its claim about COVID-19 testing. Again, not a claim. That's actually a statement pretty much made by the creator of the test, right? The article is inaccurate. Polymerase chain reaction tests are among the most common and reliable tests or reliable ways to test for the coronavirus. Again, not true. Similar claims have circulated and have been fact-checked since March. There are three main diagnostic tests: the diagnostic, antibody, and antigen, or coronavirus test, sorry. A diagnostic test, also known as PCR test, look for the genetic material of the coronavirus in a sample that's typically taken from a person's nose or throat. Healthcare providers and public health officials use them to confirm whether someone has the disease. Again, the creator of the test they're talking about and completely misusing says don't do that. That's not what it's for. Who do you think knows better, PolitiFact or the guy who invented it? In a fact sheet for its PCR test, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the test is designed to detect the virus that causes COVID-19 in respiratory samples. For example, nasal or oral swabs. Okay, let me call this out. Remember that document I showed you before? So this PolitiFact site, which seems to know better than the guy who actually invented the test and wants to talk about it like they do, wants to bring up the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and use them as a I don't know the word, beacon for truth, maybe. So let's go to the FDA's website and take a CDC document which was released in July of this year, July 13th, actually. Now, this document is called the CDC 2019 Novel Coronavirus 2019 nCoV Real-Time RT-PCR Diagnostic Panel, and you can get into all that. So this document, I brought it up before. It's off the FDA's own website. You scroll down to page 39. Under performance characteristics, all right? The analytical sensitivity of the RRT-PCR assays contained in the CDC 2019 Novel Coronavirus Real-Time RT-PCR Diagnostic Panel were determined in limit of detection studies. Since no quantified virus isolates of the 2019 nCoV are currently available, assays designed for detection of the 2019 nCoV RNA were tested with characterized stocks of in vitro transcribed full-length RNA of known titer. So they took a similar strand, or really just a strand of RNA, and then used that to test for COVID-19 because they admit they have no quantified virus isolates of COVID-19 because it doesn't exist. They're using a test for a disease they admit they don't have samples of by a guy who invented it that said don't use it for that. And then when you try to bring up these facts, which is what they are, they're facts, sites like PolitiFact want to fact check you and tell you that it's not true. This is the most on its nose case of, hey, the sky's not blue, don't believe your lying eyes. I'll tell you what the sky is. It's purple. Well, no, it's not. It's blue. Whoa, 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 whoa. You're spreading misinformation. We just fact-checked you. It's actually purple, so shut the fuck up. Do you know what I mean? This whole thing is ridiculous. And they're going to start limiting interstate travel. You're not going to be able to leave your house soon. There's going to be Nazi checkpoints essentially everywhere for this virus that does not exist. And by the way, the CDC says that if you do get this virus, you have a 99.997% survival rate. So even if it did exist, which it doesn't by their own admission, they're just throwing numbers out there which are basically flu numbers, which, by the way, I think they said flu count is down by like 98% across the globe. I wonder why. It's because they're attributing all these deaths to COVID when it's not COVID because it doesn't exist. So they have to take the numbers from somewhere. And where do you think they're taking them? From the flu. Because it is the flu. Because this virus doesn't exist.
Technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death.
There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.